Níl an teachta patírín an fós, so lenim with your eye leis an teachta O'Reilly. The third topical. Yeah, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Caoirleach. Minister, and thank you for taking this, because it is an issue that I want to start by just acknowledging that progress has been made. So it's not a case that nothing is happening. We know that there is stuff happening, and I know that you will be aware of the scale of the problem. And just in case you're not aware, some of the women who are impacted by it are in the gallery and they're watching the proceedings here. And I suppose by way of an update, what we're looking for is, we know that the report was published, and we welcome the publication of the report. We see that the women's voices are present right throughout the report as well, but that's coming from a fairly low base because there wasn't a massive amount of face-to-face interviews that took place. We would actually like to see maybe more of the women reflected back in that report, and more of their stories. And I want to also acknowledge the fact that your colleague, Minister Harris, has met with the women. And before we went into the meeting, we had a very frank exchange, and they had a very frank exchange with the Minister. It's not easy to talk about some of these issues. I raised it myself at Leaders' Questions, and I know it's a difficult subject, but it's a credit to the women themselves that they put forward their own cases, along with their representative, Melanie. They put forward their own cases in a very coherent manner, and they rarely use euphemisms, which I think is to be welcomed. We are all adults after all, but we acknowledge this is a difficult topic. Minister, specifically, I want to know, in terms of the scanners, we know that the scanners are coming, but we want to know by what date, because at the moment it's impossible for many of the women themselves to actually gauge the level of the problem, and to be able to know themselves what is the best course of treatment. That's the first question. I also want to know, with regard to the scanner that's going to be installed up in Belfast, is there a cooperation agreement in place? Can a cooperation agreement be put in place so that at the very, very least we might be able to see access to that scanner? And also to know if the women themselves are going to be afforded access to the treatment abroad scheme. And I know that that's a tricky area, and I know that, I know well the rules, and I know you yourself will know, not just from this but also from constituency cases. And I suppose the learning from the report, the governance mechanisms weren't in place at national level. They just weren't. Only yesterday, the Guardian newspaper covered this story, and they state that mesh implants made by one of the biggest pharmaceutical firms in the world, actually, that the mesh devices were inserted despite the company being warned that the mesh could shrink and that it could harden. And I just want to bring to your attention, I met a woman today who had an implant inserted only 6 months ago. So this was continuing. There has been a pause. I mean, I've looked previously for the suspension of use, and I know it's paused at the moment, but this was in use right up until very, very recently. And I suppose what we want to see is action on all of the clinical and the technical issues associated with the use of mesh. We want to see all of those actioned as a matter of urgency, because, as I said, there are women, there's some in the gallery, but there are many more who are at home because they can't travel, and there are more every day of the week who are coming forward to tell their stories and to seek help on this. Thank you.
Gormagut Caoirleach and Gormagut Tachta Asach Dish Lowerton Tover Tachta Shachama. And if there's something Caoirleach that I admire more than anything else in politicians of any hue, colour or creed is consistency. And I just want to put on the record as to note the Deputy across her consistency in this subject matter over a long period of time is always commendable, and I just want to acknowledge it on the record, if I may, Caoirleach. The report to the Minister for Health, Mr Simon Harris TD, from Dr Tony Holohan, Chief Medical Officer, of the use of urogynecological in the surgical treatment of stress urinary incontinence, SUI, and pelvic organ prolapse, which is POP, in women, was published on the Department of Health website on November the 21st, 2018. Synthetic mesh devices have been widely used in the surgical treatment of SUI and POP in women over the past 2 decades. However, controversy about the safety of mesh devices has arisen in many countries because of concerns about the frequency and severity of complications associated with their use. In responding to these questions and in recognition of the complexity of the matters arising, the Minister requested the Chief Medical Officer to prepare a report for him on the clinical and technical issues involved in ensuring both the safe and effective provision of mesh procedures in urogynecology and an appropriate response to women who suffer complications as a result of undergoing such procedures. Preparation of the report has involved consultation and engagement with national and international bodies. The report has been informed by a review of international reports and safety reviews of mesh surgery, which have been published in recent years. The report has also been informed by the personal experiences of women who have suffered complications following mesh surgery. The Minister for Health acknowledges the bravery, commitment and dignity shown by the women he met and by those women who have written to him concerning this issue in sharing what were harrowing, deeply personal experiences. The report identifies that for many women, surgical procedures using synthetic mesh devices have provided a more effective and less invasive form of treatment than traditional SUI and POP procedures. However, mesh devices are associated with significant and severe complications in a minority of women. These are of concern given the difficulties of mesh implant removal. The report makes 19 recommendations, including the development of patient information and informed consent materials, surgical professional training and multidisciplinary expertise in units carrying out mesh procedures, the development of clinical guidance, the development of information systems to monitor the ongoing use of mesh devices, ensuring the reporting of mesh-related complications, and ensuring timely, appropriate and accessible care pathways for the management of women with complications. A programme of work to advance some of the report's more important recommendations has already commenced in the HSE in advance of completion of the report. The HSE was also asked by the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer, on the 24th of July to pause all mesh procedures where clinically safe to do so until a number of key recommendations are implemented, and this was acknowledged by the Deputy in her contribution. A priority recommendation being progressed by the HSE is the clarification and development of treatment pathways and appropriate referral services for women suffering from mesh-related complications. This includes identifying the appropriate specialist clinical expertise and facilities required at hospital group level and nationally. The HSE will also examine the need to look at sourcing services from abroad to address any immediate shortfalls identified, either through utilisation of the Treatment Abroad scheme or by commissioning services from abroad. The decision to remove mesh devices in women who experience complications must be made on an individual basis, following detailed clinical assessment and discussions of the risks and benefits and treatment options by women with their treating clinicians. The HSE has published a dedicated webpage about vaginal mesh implants, including contact information for women suffering complications, which I hope is a useful resource and for which we can make the link available on their website. I appreciate I haven't answered the two deputies' direct questions about the date for the scanning machines and if there's a cooperation agreement with Belfast on that. And you also asked about the Treatment Abroad scheme, but I'll get you clarity on those, Deputy. I don't have them available to me here, but I'll forward it to the Deputy.
And I thank the Minister for his reply and indeed for his kind words. This is something I think that anyone who has met the women, you couldn't fail but to be taken by the manner in which they were treated and the dignified way, and that's acknowledged in your reply, the bravery, the commitment and the dignity shown by the women, and I would like to join with you and associate myself with those remarks, because I have found them to be such. And I do acknowledge and welcome that you are going to come back to me with regard to the access. And my questions are not designed, they weren't designed in any way to trip anyone up. What I'm trying to get at is to be able to say to these women, no more than yourself, Minister, this is when it's going to happen. So there has been an acknowledgement of what has happened to them. There is an acknowledgement by the HSE and the department that action needs to be taken. And I suppose what we're looking for is a timeline for that action and, you know, a date by which they can expect to start to see a material difference. I spoke to a woman, not from your constituency but from your county. Actually it was her husband I spoke to last week, and they had just cobbled together enough money to get themselves over to England to have a full removal procedure done there. He had spent 5.5 years looking after his wife. She's in agony. They couldn't wait. Now, I would dearly love, and more than yourself, to be able to say to that man, this is when your wife will get her treatment. And that's all that they're looking for. The acknowledgement is very welcome. The fact that they, that they have made some progress is absolutely welcome. And I suppose what we just need now is to join up the dots and be able to say, this is the date on which you're going to have either access to the scanner, access to the treatment abroad scheme, or indeed, access to a scanner here, and then they can start the process of really beginning to recover. And for some of those women, they will never recover, but it's to get them as well as they can possibly be. I do appreciate you're going to come back to me with some more information, and I will be happy to share that with the women and indeed with Melanie, their representative.
And I appreciate very much the presentation the deputies put this forward in, and I will ensure a timely response. And I can assure you, the deputy and the chair in the House, that I understand very well where you're coming from for these people needing to know the where and how of the next steps, and they need to know when, most importantly. And that's the assurance that we would like to give to these people. So I will certainly try and get a date for you without delay, Deputy. I'll try and get that for you. And the Department, as I said as well, the Minister for Health is committed to ensuring the safe and effective use of mesh implants and an appropriate and timely response to women suffering mesh complications. The Department has written to the HSE to request that it prepare a detailed implementation plan for the complete set of recommendations set out in the CMO's report, working in conjunction with our stakeholders. The Minister intends to meet with the Mesh Survivors Ireland Group in coming weeks to discuss that report as well, and just again to provide assurance that I will get those answers for the Deputy.